What if everything we thought we knew about human history was built on a lie? What if the moment civilization truly began wasn't in Mesopotamia or Egypt, but on a windswept plateau in Turkey, where people with no farms, no wheels, and no written language moved mountains to build something so grand, so intentional, and so mysterious that archaeologists still can't explain why they did it? This is the story of Gobekli Tepe, and it's about to rewrite everything. For centuries, our understanding of human development followed a neat, linear progression. Hunting and gathering came first, then agriculture, which brought settlements, religions, and organized societies. Civilization was born from farming. But Göbekli Tepe shattered that story. It obliterated the comfortable timeline we'd constructed. With each new excavation season, it keeps revealing deeper mysteries. Located in southeastern Turkey near Şanlıurfa, Göbekli Tepe sits on a hilltop rising dramatically above the landscape. The site covers only a fraction of a hectare, yet contains the world's oldest known temple complex, 12,000 years old. When Göbekli Tepe flourished, mammoths still roamed the earth. Stonehenge was 6,000 years away. The Egyptian pyramids were 7,000 years in the future. Yet here, on this remote plateau, people undertook monumental construction, rivaling anything that would follow for millennia. First surveyed in the 1960s, Göbekli Tepe's true significance emerged in the 1990s during excavations. Archaeologists discovered massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some 6 meters tall and weighing up to 20 tons. These weren't crude arrangements, but meticulously carved, transported, and positioned with precision in circular enclosures. The pillars bore intricate reliefs of animals, foxes, snakes, boars, vultures, carved with such skill they seemed to leap from stone. Here was proof that pre-agricultural people possessed organizational sophistication to undertake massive building projects. The implications were staggering. If hunter-gatherers could organize large-scale construction, coordinate labor, maintain hierarchies, and express themselves through sophisticated art, then everything we knew about human cultural development needed revision. Religion didn't arise from agriculture. Organized society didn't require farming. Spirituality, monumental thinking, and collective ambition emerged far earlier than imagined. Civilization wasn't a package tied to farming. Its fundamental components predated agriculture by thousands of years. As excavations continued, new mysteries emerged. Why was this monumental site buried intentionally? Why multiple enclosures? Why such specific pillar arrangements? For decades, these questions hung over Göbekli Tepe. Between 2023 and 2025, discoveries began revealing answers. The first major revelation involved astronomical alignments. Researchers discovered that certain pillars aligned precisely with solstices. One slab embedded in enclosure D aligned with winter solstice sunrise. These alignments weren't accidental, but verified through sophisticated astronomical simulations calibrated to 9500 BCE. Someone at Gobekli Tepe understood heavenly movements with remarkable precision. A 2024 study proposed that Pillar 43 represented something far more sophisticated, a lunisolar calendar. The carvings could record astronomical events spanning years or decades. Some researchers argue these carvings commemorate a catastrophic comet impact around 10,850 BCE, an event that devastated early populations and left such a deep scar in collective memory that it was preserved in stone. Think about this. 12,000 years ago, people in the Fertile Crescent were not only capable of sophisticated astronomical observation, but compelled to record it permanently. They were encoding knowledge into stone, creating a message to future generations. This goes beyond religious expression. This is sophisticated thought, careful observation, deliberate documentation. This is how science begins. In 2025, another discovery emerged that proved even more enigmatic. Between enclosures B and D, archaeologists uncovered a human statue embedded within a wall. The figure was mounted horizontally, carved in stone with clearly defined head and torso, as if an offering or guardian presence. The feet were missing, but the upper body remained remarkably preserved. This connected to similar finds at Karahan Tepe and other stone hill sites. At these locations, archaeologists discovered human statues depicting figures in seated positions or with specific characteristics. The presence of these figures at multiple sites suggested a shared cultural practice among pre-agricultural peoples. These statues weren't simple artistic expressions, but ritual objects anchoring religious practice. By embedding human figures in sacred walls, Göbekli Tepe's people created tangible connections between spiritual and physical realms. Standing within enclosures, people were literally surrounded by representations of ancestors, leaders, gods, or mythic beings. The walls became sacred containers holding the presence of the dead or divine. This practice wouldn't appear again in archaeological records until thousands of years later, when cultures embedded relics in temples and mosques to sanctify sacred spaces. Remarkably, this innovation, sanctifying spaces by embedding sacred objects or human representations, appears to have originated at Gobekli Tepe. These hunter-gatherers pioneered religious practices and spiritual concepts that would echo through millennia. They created templates for how humans could organize themselves spiritually, templates adopted and adapted by countless later civilizations. The human statue discovery also reshaped how archaeologists understood Göbekli Tepe. For 30 years, the dominant interpretation was that it functioned purely as a ceremonial center, where dispersed communities gathered for rituals. People supposedly lived elsewhere in small bands, journeying to Gobekli Tepe for seasonal gatherings and religious festivals. But recent subsurface investigations revealed a different story. Between 2024 and 2025, teams employed geomagnetic surveys, ground-penetrating radar, and LiDAR scanning to map buried structures. These technologies created detailed three-dimensional models of underground layouts, revealing what contradicted the purely ceremonial interpretation. Scattered around monumental enclosures were traces of residential structures, rectangular buildings and dwellings that sheltered families. Food processing facilities and storage areas were also present. Gobekli Tepe wasn't simply visited periodically. It hosted semi-permanent populations who lived there for extended periods. People built homes, processed food, stored supplies, and organized daily life while maintaining monumental religious structures. This forced complete reconsideration. Gobekli Tepe was simultaneously home and temple, settlement, and sacred center. Ordinary life intersected with spiritual practice in ways modern, secular society has forgotten. Religious structures were woven into how people actually lived. You emerged from your dwelling, gazed at towering pillars decorated with sacred carvings, felt ancestors' presence embedded in walls, and performed rituals binding you to community and cosmos. Subsurface research revealed something unexpected about the site's layout. When archaeologists mapped all structures together, monumental enclosures, residential buildings, processing areas, they noticed something remarkable. Positioning wasn't random. Structures followed intentional, geometric patterns. Enclosures were arranged according to specific spatial relationships, suggesting advanced mathematical knowledge. Pillars aligned in ways hinting at sophisticated spatial understanding. Some alignments correlated with astronomical phenomena. Others created sight lines directing processional movement. This wasn't a site that grew organically through trial and error. This was planned. Someone made deliberate choices about positioning each structure, arranging pillars, creating sight lines and sacred pathways. The entire site was conceived as an integrated whole, a unified design realized through multiple construction phases. This planning suggests something beyond religious impulse. It suggests architectural vision, spatial intelligence, and the ability to imagine a future state and work systematically toward it. The animal carvings at Gobekli Tepe add another layer to this interpretation. For decades, archaeologists had noted the profusion of animal reliefs: foxes, snakes, boars, vultures, scorpions, decorating the pillars and walls. They were beautiful, skillfully executed, and clearly important to the people who created them. But were they merely decorative? Were they symbols of prey? Animals important to the hunt? Were they spiritual beings or shamanic helpers? Recent analysis suggests the answer is more complex. The animals don't appear randomly distributed. They seem to follow organizational patterns. Certain animals appear in specific locations, possibly telling narratives or conveying teachings through visual sequences. Some researchers propose that the animals might represent constellations or celestial phenomena, further evidence that these ancient people were mapping the cosmos onto their sacred spaces. Particularly intriguing is the prominence of vultures at Gobekli Tepe. Vultures appear repeatedly in carvings and three-dimensional representations. Vultures are birds of prey that feed on the dead, creatures that would have been powerfully present in human experience before the development of agriculture and burial practices. In shamanic traditions across multiple cultures, vultures have been associated with death, transformation, and connection between the earthly and spiritual realms. If the people of Gobekli Tepe were engaging in some form of shamanic practice, vultures would carry deep, symbolic weight. Recent discoveries at Karahan Tepe, including a bird statue clearly showing biek, eyes, and wings, reinforce the significance of avian symbolism in these early religious systems. What's emerging from all these discoveries is a picture of Gobekli Tepe as something far more sophisticated than a simple religious site. It was a place where multiple forms of knowledge were being generated and transmitted. Astronomical knowledge was being observed and recorded. Architectural and spatial knowledge was being applied to create meaningful arrangements of structures and pillars. Artistic knowledge was being deployed to create symbolic representations that conveyed spiritual and practical information. Social knowledge was being expressed through the organization of labor, the assignment of roles, and the maintenance of hierarchies necessary to coordinate large-scale construction projects. This was an intellectual center as much as a spiritual one, a place where human consciousness was being actively cultivated and expanded. The 2025 excavation season, which concluded in October of that year, confirmed that this process of discovery was far from complete. Under the protective roofing that now covers the main excavation area, archaeologists continued systematic work, particularly focusing on Enclosure C, the largest and most impressive of the discovered structures. Enclosure C is where the iconic T-shaped pillars stand in their most dramatic arrangement, where the connection between human endeavor and spiritual aspiration seems most palpable. The restoration work undertaken in 2025 involved careful reinforcement of walls, stabilization of standing pillars, and even the re-erection of several massive stones using methods that attempted to mirror ancient construction techniques. The restoration team employed authentic materials, including mortar reinforced with goat hair, trying to preserve historical accuracy while providing structural support for preservation. This wasn't just about saving a ruin, it was about honoring the intentions of the original builders, about maintaining the integrity of their vision as it had come down through 12,000 years. And as the team worked, new questions kept emerging. How exactly had people cut and shaped these massive stones without metal tools? What methods had they used to transport pillars weighing 20 tons across the landscape? How had they managed to set them upright without modern equipment? Each question pointed to a level of technical sophistication that kept surprising even the most experienced archaeologists. The subsurface research provided some clues. Unfinished monoliths found in nearby quarries showed cut marks and hammerstones, evidence of the techniques used to extract and shape the limestone. The marks suggested a deliberate methodology, not random bashing, but systematic working. People clearly understood stone as a material, understood its properties, understood how to work with it to achieve specific results. The presence of partially completed pillars in quarries also revealed something about the workflow. Pillars were carved before being transported, which means planners knew the exact size and specifications they needed before committing massive labor to moving raw stone. This required accurate measurements, clear communication, and advanced planning. The quarries themselves yielded other evidence of sophisticated organization. Multiple unfinished pieces of different ages suggested sustained work over extended periods. This wasn't a one-time quarrying effort, but an ongoing source of material, worked seasonally or continuously depending on construction needs. The presence of different types of cutting tools at different levels indicated that techniques had evolved and improved over time. The people of Göbekli Tepe weren't just moving stone, they were developing and refining methods of working stone. They were innovating, experimenting, improving their craft with each generation. Beyond the monumental and the technological, recent discoveries have also shed light on daily life at Göbekli Tepe in ways that earlier excavations could not. Organic remains, studied through careful archaeological technique and scientific analysis, reveal what people actually ate. Seeds and bones indicate a diet that incorporated wild cereals, legumes, and hunted game. The processing tools found during subsurface surveys, mortars, pestles, grinding stones, show that plant food processing was a significant activity, particularly grain processing. This suggests that while farming hadn't been adopted, people had begun intensively managing wild plants, harvesting them systematically, and processing them on a scale that required storage and organization. The line between hunter-gathering and agriculture was blurrier than previously imagined. Faunal remains provide another window into ancient life. The bones of game animals show butchering patterns indicating systematic hunting and meat distribution. Some researchers have identified specialized toolkits suggesting that hunting had become more organized, perhaps with specialists or hunting parties that brought meat back to the settlement. The presence of massive feasting assemblages, evidence of large gatherings where significant quantities of meat were consumed, suggests ceremonial meals that brought communities together. These weren't just practical feeding events, they were ritual occasions that reinforced social bonds and religious meanings. The discovery of worked bone and antler in subsurface areas indicates that tool-making extended beyond stone. Bone was shaped into fishhooks, harpoon points, and ornamental objects. Some bone objects were decorated with geometric patterns, suggesting that ornamentation and aesthetic expression extended beyond the monumental pillars to everyday implements. People carried beauty with them, incorporated it into the tools they used daily. This speaks to a value system where aesthetics mattered, where the appearance of an object held significance beyond pure functionality. Perhaps most evocatively, researchers have identified what appear to be symbolic or ornamental objects with no obvious practical purpose. Decorated bone figurines, carved stones that seem to serve no utilitarian function, and engraved objects whose meanings remain opaque all point to the existence of a rich, symbolic world that we can barely glimpse across 12,000 years. These objects represented someone's devotion to creating meaning, to expressing ideas or emotions that transcended survival necessities. This is the territory of art, of metaphor, of abstraction, proof that the human mind at Göbekli Tepe was operating in registers we normally associate only with later civilizations. The implications of everything discovered at Gobekli Tepe ripple outward into questions about the very nature of human development and historical inevitability. For more than a century, the standard narrative held that civilization emerged from agriculture in a relatively straightforward causal chain. Farming allowed surplus production, which allowed population growth, which required organization and hierarchy, which led to cities and temples and written records. Each stage supposedly enabled the next. But Göbekli Tepe demonstrated that this narrative was oversimplified. Religious complexity, monumental architecture, sophisticated social organization, and abstract thought could all emerge before agriculture. These weren't consequences of farming, but independent developments that arose from the human capacity for meaning-making and collective effort. This realization has profound implications for how we understand ourselves as a species. For most of human history, we lived as hunter-gatherers, and conventional wisdom suggested that such societies were relatively simple, lacking in ambition, lacking in the drive to create lasting monuments or complex symbolic systems. Göbekli Tepe demolished that assumption. Hunter-gatherers were not primitive. They were capable of monumental thinking and monumental action. They could envision structures that would outlast their builders by thousands of years and dedicate themselves to realizing those visions. They could develop religious philosophies, sophisticated enough to generate rituals involving embedded human statues and celestial calendars. The difference between them and later agricultural societies wasn't that they were less capable or less intelligent. The difference was environmental, technological, and circumstantial. What Gobekli Tepe reveals is the incredible sophistication that humans achieved when they committed themselves to non-subsistence endeavors, when they allowed portions of their communities to dedicate themselves to specialized tasks like monument building, art making, and spiritual leadership. It reveals that these capacities for organization, vision, and creativity don't require agriculture. They require something different. A stable resource base sufficient to support specialization, and a social system sophisticated enough to organize and coordinate labor on large scales. The people of Göbekli Tepe had both, despite lacking agriculture. The site sits within a broader constellation of similar early sites in southeastern Turkey known as the Stone Hills, or Taş Tepeler. Karahan Tepe, Sabert, and other locations have yielded similar evidence of early monumental construction and sophisticated religious practice. This wasn't an isolated phenomenon at a single site, but part of a regional cultural flowering that occurred in this region during the terminal Pleistocene and early Holocene. What caused this cultural efflorescence? Climate, geography, the availability of wild resources. These factors certainly played roles. But there's also something about this particular region at this particular time that seemed to stimulate human creativity and ambition in unique ways. The climate of southeastern Anatolia at the time Göbekli Tepe was built was considerably wetter and greener than it is today. The region was rich in wild game and wild plants, particularly wild cereal grasses that could support denser human populations than typical hunter-gatherer societies. This resource abundance created the possibility for more permanent settlements and larger gatherings. It reduced the necessity of constant movement and created opportunities for people to invest in projects with returns that wouldn't be realized for generations. In this context, the decision to build Göbekli Tepe makes sense, not as an inevitable product of cultural development, but as a choice made possible by particular environmental circumstances and the vision of particular individuals or groups who wanted to create something lasting and sacred. The construction of Göbekli Tepe was likely accomplished over many decades or even centuries, with different enclosures built in sequence during different phases of occupation. Each phase left its mark on the archaeological record, and careful excavation has begun to reveal the chronology of construction. The earliest structures appear to date to around 9600 BCE, making them among the oldest monumental structures known to archaeology anywhere in the world. Later structures show evidence of modification, of pillars being reset or replaced, of walls being rebuilt and reinforced. The site grew and changed across centuries, suggesting that Göbekli Tepe remained a significant place for generations of communities who maintained, modified, and added to the structures left by their predecessors. Then, sometime around 8000 BCE, this all changed. The site was deliberately buried. Over the course of months or years, massive amounts of earth were moved and placed over the enclosures, covering the T-shaped pillars, obscuring the pathways, burying the temples. Whether this was done as a final ritual closure, as protection against erosion or degradation, or as response to some cultural shift that made maintaining the site impossible, we can only speculate. But the intentionality is clear. This wasn't abandonment followed by natural degradation. This was deliberate, organized burial, another massive project requiring coordination and labor, this time directed toward hiding rather than revealing the sacred structures. Whatever meaning this burial held for the people who performed it is lost to us now, whispered away on the wind that sweeps across that Turkish plateau. For 10,000 years, Gobekli Tepe remained hidden beneath the soil, forgotten except in the most fragmentary folk memories or mythological tales. Then came the modern era, surveys and excavations, scientific analysis, and technological innovation. Each discovery layer revealed more of what had been hidden, more evidence of a sophisticated ancient world that contradicted comfortable assumptions about how civilization developed. And the discoveries continue. Each excavation season brings new findings. The work is far from complete. Archaeologists estimate that perhaps 90% of Gobekli Tepe remains unexcavated. At the current pace of work, with current technologies and current funding, the complete exploration of the site would take more than a century and a half. What remains to be discovered at Gobekli Tepe could rewrite history again. There are indications of additional enclosures that haven't been touched by excavators. Subsurface surveys suggest that earlier occupation phases might be buried deeper than initially realized, possibly extending the chronology of human activity at the site even further back. The residential areas have barely been explored. The refuse middens, where ancient peoples dumped broken tools and food scraps, remain largely unexcavated. Each of these contexts holds information about how people actually lived, what they ate, what they made, how they organized themselves. As these materials come to light, our understanding will deepen and multiply. What's perhaps most profound about Gobekli Tepe is how it forces us to confront the limitations of our own historical perspective. We often assume that the world has been progressing linearly toward greater complexity and sophistication. We look at history as an arc bending toward enlightenment and progress. But Gobekli Tepe suggests something more complicated and more troubling. These ancient people achieved things we don't fully understand. They possessed knowledge and technical capabilities that required sophisticated learning systems to transmit. They organized themselves for purposes we can only partially comprehend, and then their civilization declined or transformed or moved in new directions. The monumental structures were buried, the knowledge that created them dispersed or was forgotten. Later societies would have to reinvent the wheel, reinvent agriculture, reinvent monumental architecture from scratch. This pattern repeated throughout human history. Civilizations rose to remarkable heights of achievement, then collapsed or transformed, sometimes taking their knowledge and skills with them. The people of Gobekli Tepe remind us that sophistication and complexity aren't irreversible achievements. They require ongoing commitment and investment. They can be lost, and they can exist in forms radically different from what we expect. We often search for evidence of past sophistication in familiar places, in written records and architectural remnants that match our aesthetic standards, materials and methods we recognize. But Gobekli Tepe whispers to us across 12,000 years, with evidence of sophistication expressed through stone pillars and embedded human figures and astronomical alignments that we're only now learning to read. The ongoing excavations at Gobekli Tepe continue under the direction of Nekmi Karul and his international team, working in collaboration with Turkish cultural authorities and archaeological institutions from around the world. The work combines traditional excavation with cutting-edge scientific analysis, geomagnetic surveys, LiDAR scanning, radiocarbon dating, chemical analysis of stone composition, sophisticated photogrammetry that creates three-dimensional models of artifacts and structures. Each technology adds layers of understanding to the physical evidence that the Earth has preserved. The site has become increasingly important to the Turkish government and to UNESCO. In 2018, Gobekli Tepe was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognizing its global cultural significance. The Turkish government has invested in conservation and restoration efforts, constructing protective roofing over the main excavation areas, building visitor facilities, and planning for sustainable tourism that allows people to experience this remarkable place without destroying it through overuse. An exhibition of Gobekli Tepe artifacts that appeared in million visitors, demonstrating the worldwide fascination with this ancient site. A new exhibition titled Myths in Stone, Gobekli Tepe, and the World of the Last Hunters is scheduled to open at Berlin's James Simon Gallery in February 2026, bringing replicas and information about the site to audiences across Europe. As we stand at the beginning of the 21st century, looking back at the discoveries emerging from Gobekli Tepe, we're confronted with an essential truth about human nature that we'd partially forgotten. We are creatures capable of imagining futures and organizing ourselves to realize those visions. We are motivated by forces that transcend mere survival, by spirituality, by aesthetics, by the desire to create meaning and permanence. We are compelled to gather together, to build things together, to create shared symbols and rituals that bind us to something larger than ourselves. These capacities don't emerge from economic systems or technological achievements. They emerge from something deeper in what it means to be human. The people of Gobekli Tepe, living on that plateau in southeastern Anatolia 12,000 years ago, understood this intuitively. They possessed no written philosophy explaining their motivations, no economic theory justifying their investments of labor. They simply knew that some things were worth doing, worth dedicating resources to, worth preserving through stone and ritual and repeated practice. They built monuments not because they had to, but because they chose to. And through those choices, they revealed something eternal about the human spirit, something that outlasted their civilization by millennia and speaks across 12,000 years to touch us still. This is the hidden pattern that Göbekli Tepe reveals, not a single unified theory or explanation, but a reminder that humans at all times and places have been capable of sophistication, vision, and transcendence. The specifics change from era to era and culture to culture, but the underlying impulse remains constant. We see it in Göbekli Tepe's T-shaped pillars reaching toward the sky. We see it in the human statues embedded in sacred walls. We see it in the careful alignments with celestial events. We see it in the deliberate geometric arrangements of structures designed to guide human movement and focus human attention. This is civilization in its essence, not the inevitable product of farming or technology, but the expression of meaning-making creatures choosing to create lasting monuments to their understanding of the sacred. And as excavations continue at this remarkable site, revealing layer upon layer of ancient achievement, we're reminded that our knowledge of the past remains incomplete. The most profound secrets are often found not in what we already know, but in what lies beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered by those patient and humble enough to listen to what ancient stones still have to teach us.